2 today. Too.
It is 2/2/22.
Yeah,
2/2/22.
didn't realize that.
Yeah. Us numerologists love that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll call the meeting to order at 6:30. And just a little comment before we get started. You may notice that West Vadnais Lake is not on the agenda. We couldn't get everything in line to have that discussion today because of illnesses and things.
Mhm.
So hopefully it'll be next time.
Yeah, we're planning for March, so.
Okay. So do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Move it.
Well, second,
Okay, any discussion? Tina, you want to call the roll?
Sure, Cliff,
aye.
Diane,
Aye.
Val. Oh, did we lose Val? I think we did.
Go. Okay.
Still have a quorum.
We
And
lost
Larry.
Val. I vote aye. So we got 3 of us at least, so we're done.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see if Val's going to come back. And Pam, for those of you who are interested, Pam is not going to be here tonight. She had a conflict come up. Okay. Well, we have a quorum. We'll keep on going. Consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I will move to approve the consent agenda.
A second.
Any discussion? Okay, Tina, call the roll.
Okay, Cliff,
Aye.
Diane,
Aye.
and Larry.
Aye. Do we have any visitors that are going to make comments?
I'll just clarify that Dan, Tyler, and Ian are here for a permit later in the agenda, the Amira Senior Apartments.
Okay, thank you. We'll be getting to that very shortly. But now we're getting to the meat of the agenda. If there's no other visitor comments, it would be on the permit program. And can we figure out where Val is? Or
Yeah, he just texted me and said that his computer died and he's searching for his corridor backup, so.
okay, well, we won't hold up any further. Let's move on to item number 5, which is applications. The first one, 2203, is Jarvis Woods, 2nd edition, Little Canada.
Yeah, this permit application was not included on the consent agenda because of a variance being requested for temporary wetland disturbance. But let me know if you have any questions on anything.
What was the first edition, Nicole? Was that just north of this?
I can picture where it is, but I don't know spatially. I think it was like back in 07, I want to say. Off Labor Road to the
Yeah.
east, closer to the lake, I believe.
Oh, yeah, this is a piece of property that was fairly contentious for a long period of time. The owners were contesting wetland delineations and contending that they were man-made, and so it's good to see that they've moved along and they've accepted what's there, and they're just developing what they can. So I'm glad to see it.
Yeah, I agree. I did do a couple delineation reviews for this one over the years, so to see it move forward now, and I know there had been ones in the past too, so it's interesting to see that, you know, they were able to come up with something that largely avoided the wetland.
And the wetland is a managed B wetland.
That's right, yeah.
So do they meet the minimum setback average?
Yeah, they meet the buffer in the permanent condition, but they're asking a variance for temporary disturbance for that sanitary sewer line, and then also like silt fence placement. So the disturbance is temporary. But otherwise, yeah, they meet the buffer.
And we monitor that over time. I mean, the native restoration, because sometimes that can be problematic.
Yeah,
do we
yeah,
hold
it doesn't
escrow?
have, we do have an escrow for the stormwater, or, the whole development. This isn't held to as rigorous as like a wetland replacement plan, where they have to monitor and maintain the buffer for 5 years. But we certainly, are inspecting for erosion control and make sure that it's fully established with native veg before a permit would be closed out. I'm guessing it would be long before like the last home was even built. So
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
yeah.
And one question I had on that, and some of the other ones too, when you say you're using a native wetland mix, does that mimic what was already there when they disturb it, or is it something different?
That's the intent. It's mostly selected for what they, think the hydrology is going to be. So it's like, more water friendly species. In actuality, it's probably higher quality than it is now. In these urban areas, there's a lot of, weeds and things like that. But obviously, they're not going to be seeding weeds. So, but yeah, there's the difference between like the wetland and the upland mixes because of the species and their tolerance for water.
And when we say it was approved on 10/19/20, is that by Bowser?
That is through the State Wetland Conservation Act. The watershed is the local government unit responsible, and Bowser oversees that implementation. But yeah, that approval is referencing the state law.
Okay, any other comments? Now, Val, are you there?
Yes, I am here. Sorry, my computer died.
Okay,
No, I did have a quick question, but I'm worried that repeat what you guys were just talking about.
Oh, it's no problem.
We talking about permit 2203?
yes,
Yeah, we're on that right now.
I was kind of curious, and like I said, forgive me if this was already asked, but given the changes to that wetland or their plan to expand that wetland, does it increase the risk or the behavior? Is there a chance that that might lead to a new lake formation just by doing those small expansions, is what the diagram seemed to imply?
They're not actually expanding their, maybe you're talking about the next permit. They are
I think
expanding the next.
Oh, maybe, sorry. My bad.
No, it's okay.
I mixed them up.
For this project, there's temporary disturbance with the sanitary sewer line, but it's anticipated that it's still going to be wetland when they're done. It's a buried line, and there's no net loss and no wetland impacts requiring replacement. So for this one, there's no wetland expansion or loss of permanent wetland anticipated.
okay, any other questions or discussion? Do I have a motion to approve permit 2203?
I will move approving permit 2203.
Variance. Second,
Seconded.
there you go. Any other discussion? Tina, can call the roll.
Okay, Cliff,
Aye.
Diane,
Aye.
Val,
You're muted.
You're muted, Val.
Oh, Val, can you hear us?
Okay, give us a thumbs up.
Okay.
Hi,
Okay.
from Val.
Okay.
Hi, sorry.
Okay.
Thanks for working.
Thanks. And Larry, sorry.
Aye. Okay. Tough start. Next item is permit number 2205. The Marrow
Yeah.
Senior Apartments.
Yeah, this is a senior living proposal in Woodbury. Part of this property was actually proposed for development a couple years ago. And this was a different developer. They were proposing to fill the wetland that's on site. And that was, rejected by the board. And so this new developer purchased additional property for a larger development, and a subsequent delineation was done, and there are 2 wetlands on the larger site. They were able to avoid wetland impacts, and in order to do so, though, they needed to, I don't know if it was technically a variance, but the city of Woodbury had more stringent setbacks for the wetlands that they weren't able to meet with the building footprint, and they were, worried about taking down certain mature trees. So as a condition of city approval, the city did request that the north wetland was expanded with an upland buffer. So a variance is requested for temporary buffer disturbance in order to do this. Also erosion control placement. And, there's a point where the building gets close to the buffer, so if they need to disturb it for equipment. It's similar to the last project in that they'll be responsible for restoring with native seed. There's wetland and upland seed mixes depending on the location. But no permanent wetland impacts are proposed, and they are meeting our buffer requirements in the final condition. And I guess, Val, do you want to repeat your question about the wetland expansion?
No, I realized I asked the question incorrectly. I was curious about, so they're just effectively growing that area. Is that fair? And so I'm not worried about that one. I misread the last permit question. I can send you to that offline. I don't think it would have stopped or changed my vote. It was
Okay.
more of a clarification.
Sounds good.
But Nicole, it appears to me that they're voluntarily doing that wetland expansion, correct?
It's not required by watershed rules, but the city did request that as a condition for them amending or amending their setback requirements that they usually would have. So
I think it's an interesting concept. Yeah.
I know that the applicant works very closely with the city of Woodbury on tree inventory and making sure that a lot of the good quality mature trees were preserved on this property.
I have a question. Why was the wetlands classification changed from A to B?
Yeah, from A to B. We had previous MNRAM designations, which don't always reflect on-site conditions. And so when we did the delineation review, they submitted data sheets. And I think there's MNRAM discussion later in this meeting to support classification change. And this was done, overseen by Bowser as well. Even though it doesn't have really anything to do with WACA, Ben from Bowser is a lot more knowledgeable on some of the metrics that they were measuring and the data that they submitted. So the North Wetland was moved to a medium classification, and it was previously listed as a high. And that effectively minimizes their buffer. But in this case, they're actually expanding the buffer because of the City Woodbury request. So I don't know if realistically it's changing much to have this classification change, but yeah, and then the other wetland was a low quality wetland. Previously did not have a classification. It was kind of obscured from LiDAR and it's in a wooded area. So they submitted data for that as well.
So we have in our rules that if a wetland doesn't have a classification, or if an applicant wants to challenge as in quotes, it's not, if they're questioning that the classification is accurate, then they're welcome to do a MinRam assessment and provide that information to us for review. And so I'm assuming that's how that.
Yeah, they can't just say, you know, looking at this wetland, it looks like low quality. They have to submit supporting documentation to support their request. So, and that's reviewed by staff.
So in the little picture that we have, which is the wetland that went from A to B? The kind of big one down in the lower right-hand corner?
So there's a couple maps. If you're looking at the variance request map, that would be on page 54 PDF. The northern wetland was redesignated as a managed B. The wetland to the sort of southeast previously did not have a classification, and that's the lower quality wetland. Does that answer your question?
I'm still a little lost as to where we are. Okay.
That that's the exhibit one.
Hmm.
After, yeah, it's part of the variance request. It
The
shows
other,
both the wetlands.
the other question I had is that they're really tight on their buffer. What happens if one of these wetlands with rising water gets higher and goes into the buffer and reduces the buffer? What happens then?
You know, I think that was addressed in the stormwater report. They were included in the model for the site. Dan or Tyler, I don't know if you want to speak specifically on the runoff to the wetlands. And if you
We talk-
anticipate that'll
yeah.
change.
Are we talking about the northern wetland that's being expanded, or the wetland that's right next to the building that we're maintaining?
Next to the building.
Yeah, I don't think we did a specific, and maybe Tyler, you can answer this more specifically, but I don't think we did a specific drainage analysis for that area. It's a real low lying area with probably maybe a foot or so of elevation that could hold water. So it would overflow like it does today. We're not changing the overflow characteristics. It will continue to operate as it does today and presently operates. And it's well below the building elevation, so we're not going to have any negative impact on the building with that. Does that answer the question?
Maybe. My question was, what if the characteristic of the wetland changes and it becomes higher? That reduces the buffer, and you're right on the line of the buffer. 12.5 feet versus 13 feet. Does that suddenly put the area in violation?
No, we wouldn't look at it that way. I mean, like he mentioned, it has an overflow. So it wouldn't, it's not landlocked, right? So it'll have a place to drain out if it got higher than it is now or planned to be. And then, you know, wetland buffers are meant to take on that, they take some water in and then they go down and up. So we wouldn't look at it that way from a buffer perspective.
Okay.
It would probably be like a wetland with a fixed outlet. There's no culvert, but there's an overflow saddle, and that's not being affected. So we would anticipate that regardless of the water coming in or going out, it should stay pretty close to what it is today.
Thanks, Dan.
Any other questions or discussion? Do I have a motion to approve 2205?
So moved.
I'll second.
Further discussion? Tina, call the roll.
Okay, Cliff,
Aye.
Diane,
Aye.
Val,
Aye.
and Larry.
Aye. Okay.
All right.
The two
Thank you.
applications. You guys.
So Mr. Chair, excuse me, Dan Parks again, was that a motion on the approval of the wetland
Oh,
variance, or was it on the stormwater plan as well? Maybe I missed the intro.
well, the permit and the variance, correct? Nicole?
Yes, that's
Very
right.
good.
That
Very
was
good. Thank
intent,
you so
that was the
much.
intent of my motion.
Thank you so much.
Mhm. Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to the permit program enforcement action report. Any comments, Nicole or anybody?
Yeah, it's just been a slow month, really cold, really snow covered. So a lot of the activity on sites is indoor, building work, but Mary still drove around to those active sites to make sure, there's not a lot of tracking or anything, but everything's pretty well frozen. But yeah, she's still keeping an eye, just not doing full inspections at this time of year. And then I also included a sample. This is actually a real inspection report from Mary. We had a permit summary discussion last month, and there seemed to be some questions about what's the violation versus what's non-compliant and what's being counted in that summary. So I showed a example of an inspection report. There's 3 different, for each question, there's compliant, non-compliant, not applicable. I guess there's 4, or under review. Under review is generally like a first warning for something. Non-compliant is if it's, a little more egregious, or if it's a repeat item. So each time it's non-compliant, that's counted as a violation. So in this inspection report, there were 2 violations resulting in 1 non-compliant inspection, because you see she gave a letter grade C, not in compliance, at the end of the report. The intent of our inspection report is to be pretty short. When inspections warrant that, we don't want something too long and arduous for contractors to read if it's a quick, small site to inspect. But at the same time, sometimes we include the addendums with photos that you see following the report that gives the contractor a little more, if we say there's an inlet that needs to be repaired, they know which one we're talking about. So I included that as well. Let me know if there's any questions on our inspection report format or the questions that we included.
Question, Nicole? Is
Yeah.
this information, the full report, logged into the database system?
Yeah,
On each permit? Okay.
yep. So those are kept in perpetuity, and they're also tied to the applicant's escrow. So automatically deducts money from escrow if the report's a C, D, or F non-compliant grade.
Okay, great.
Yeah, it was very, very interesting. Thank you. In fact, I know that place fairly well since I drive by it about 4 times a week.
Oh. Went up fast.
Yeah, it's a interesting place. Anyway, but thank you. That's very helpful to see the report.
Yeah.
Answer questions on the report?
I don't have a question, but I want to echo what Larry said. It's just so helpful to see even the forms you use and the process. Not
Yeah.
that we have to know you always give us good summaries, but it's really nice to understand the process better. Thank you.
Yeah.
Very helpful. Okay. Any other comments on the permit program? Anybody? Okay, moving on to number 6, the Stewardship Grant Program. We have one 220 or 2202 CS. Anybody want to speak to that one? Page is not online. See.
Yeah, Paige wasn't able to be here tonight, so I said that I would answer any questions that you may have. As she wrote up in the summary, this is a bigger project. They were looking at doing 5 rain gardens along with some porous asphalt. We did determine along with the applicant that the porous asphalt wasn't cost effective to move forward with. So they did drop that from their application. And so it's the 5 rain gardens on this site. They had a pretty minimalistic planting plan. And so Paige had asked them to beef that up. And when they came back slightly over the $100,000 grant request. So we said we would ask you, the board, if you were amenable to that. Otherwise, if you wanted to hold it to the 100,000, then they would just decrease their planting plans to meet that need.
Is the planting plan having more variety or more beautiful flowers, or what was the improvement?
Yes, definitely bigger. I think it was more plugs versus seeding and more variety, definitely.
Will we have signage there to let people know that this rain garden is a result of our programs?
Yes, yep. We sign all of these projects with our signs.
Okay.
I think this is an excellent project. I've been eyeing that property for quite a while. They have a lot of asphalt and a lot of rooftops. So I'm glad to see that it should be pretty effective at reducing their volume.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing to make it look good, so that the idea behind it is more favorable to people who are looking at it. So I'm okay with that. Anyway,
Yeah, and I support the higher amount as well.
any other comments or anything?
No, I was going to say the same thing as what Cliff said. I mean, the return on investment on this makes the marginal increase is worth it.
Yeah. Okay, so do I have a motion to approve 2202 CS?
Motion to approve 2202 CS.
Yeah.
I'll second.
Second.
Okay.
Okay, any other further discussion? Tina, call the roll.
Okay, Cliff,
Aye.
Diane?
Aye.
Val?
Aye.
And Larry?
Aye. All right, that takes us to item number 7, the Tanner's Lake Outlet Coordination. Is,
I think Brad will kick this off for us.
Brad will take it, okay.
Yeah, I'll open it up to questions here in a moment. Just as a bit of background, back in the early 90s, we completed a study of the Tanner's Lake area and looked at an old outlet pipeline that was underneath the city of Landfall. Videotaped that pipeline and found that it was degraded. So the district went in and installed a new 26-inch pipeline from the south side of the lake to connect with a pipe that existed in I-94. Prior to that, the lake could, in a high flow situation, would overflow and make its way down to you know, through the city of landfall and to that pipe and the Tanner's Lake outlet at that time provided this new drainage. But as a part of that analysis, we had to make a choice at some point where we had to leave several homes in the flood zone because it wasn't cost effective to put in a larger pipe. And that's how it still exists today. I think we have 4 homes that are in the floodplain that we have emergency response plans for, working with the city of Oakdale. But with this particular project that MnDOT is undertaking, they will be doing major reconstruction of I-94, and it gives us an opportunity to start to upgrade the pipe system that currently exists in the freeway, because they will be digging it up. And so what this memo lays out is different scenarios. The scenario 1 is really just replacing the pipe that currently exists, same size. Scenario 2 is putting in a larger diameter pipe that would actually work better for our current system. And then scenario 3, which we evaluated, you know, that would provide the adequate capacity in 94 to pass enough flow from Tanner's to Battle Creek Lake to remove those homes from the flood zone. But the catch is, at this point in time, the downstream system cannot accept that much water. But we really have, you know, what we would consider about a once in a 50-year to 70-year opportunity, since the road is going to be ripped up, to possibly add in these larger pipes, even though they would not be used immediately. Maybe at some point in the future, we could arrange for more flow to be passed through, or do a combination resiliency study similar in this system as we did to the Phelan system. But really what this lays out is, you know, our suggestion to consider this opportunity with MnDOT to at least upgrade the capacity in the highway system, in the event at some point in the future we could connect with that with enough capacity upstream to carry the water and remove those homes from the flood zone. So that's laid out in the memo. Unfortunately, we did not have the costs from MnDOT for this until yesterday. So I do have a summary of the different costs, and I'm going to try to share my screen here, see if I can get it up there. I think it's, let me know when you can see my screen.
Got it.
Yep.
So the 3 scenarios are laid out here, and with scenario 1, again, it's just replacing the 42-inch pipe that's currently in the freeway. MnDOT would make that full contribution of $342,270. The additional scenarios, which scenario 2 is upsizing that pipe, we'd still get the full contribution by MnDOT, and the district would pay the additional amount for just the upsizing to that 60-inch equivalent. But what we are recommending in this memo, given the opportunity here, is to go ahead and add both of the twin pipes through the roadway, since it is open cut, and that would be a contribution of approximately $375,000 by the district in construction costs. Work would be done by MnDOT during their normal construction process, and I'm guessing, Tina, we would just reimburse MnDOT. Is that how you would?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
Yeah, we'd have to work out that agreement with them, but
right. But the second pipe would essentially be either essentially plugged or actually plugged until at a time when they could be used in the future. But you know, we just know based on our experience that if we put in one pipe and we have this opportunity in the future, the tunneling under the roadway and the constraints that are in the roadway would be far more expensive than this $375,000. So that is the question before the board. Our suggestion is scenario 3 to authorize MinDOT to go ahead and put in both pipes and contribute this additional amount in anticipation of some point in the future being able to use it. So.
I basically agree with that. One of my questions though is, I think at some point it said that putting a 60-inch pipe in was like the maximum you could get to avoid utilities. So how does putting 2 of them in avoid that? If one of them is the biggest one you can put in to avoid utilities.
So the utilities are above, so there's really a constraint on the top side and on the bottom side. So it's confined to the equivalent arch pipe configuration of a 60-inch equivalent capacity. So that's as much as you can get in the largest diameter pipe in that system. So just adding another one adjacent to it, because the utilities conflicts are above and below, allows that to happen.
That answers that question. Thank you.
Cliff?
So I'm thinking about scenario 2 and 3. Initially, I thought scenario 2 was the more logical one. I'm thinking about scenario 3 being difficult because I don't see the odds of ever increasing capacity downstream. So what would be the advantage of adding that capacity when Battle Creek Lake can't handle it because there's flooding issues around Battle Creek Lake, and the creek can't handle it downstream because we can't run more water down Battle Creek. So what's the advantage of having an extra pipe? I thought the larger pipe with option 2 could definitely help Tanner's Lake, but not solve the problem.
Right. Well, it is a low probability for sure, being able to use that. Again, is there a time in the future, maybe even 20 years down the road, where we could develop more storage capacity in Battle Creek Lake and adjacent areas? Does Weir Drive get raised, and we would allow that to bounce up and still, maintain a limiting discharge to Battle Creek, or is the creek, upgraded? So, but it's a low probability, yes, because there are flooding issues on that side too, as you well know. One home was removed, another one was flood protected on the west side, and Weir Drive floods on the east side. So it's a low probability.
I forgot the numbers between scenario 2 and scenario 3. What was the difference? About double in scenario 3?
Well, let me share it again. And
It's like 150K or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. The other thing is we're starting to learn or getting experience with like with the Keller and Phelan weirs of things that we can actually manage.
Double.
And this may be an opportunity if there's not a lot of water downstream, because we all seem to talk about these things as if we're getting a storm uniformly across the whole watershed. That doesn't happen. So if it may be a possibility of looking at automating that, and if you have 2 outlets to it, you might have a lot of water in Tanner's Lake and not that much downstream, and you can open up that extra pipe if you do it. So I would think for future use, that would be a good thing to do, because like Brad said, we're not going to have them dig up I-94 again for quite a while.
So do we have enough funds in our floodplain protection or fund or contingency to cover this?
Yeah, we definitely have quite a bit of funds left in our flood risk reduction fund. Millions, 2 million, I think, that's not dedicated to something else or being thought of being used for something else at this time. So, as discussed, I think the opportunity to put this in, I think, is too great to pass.
Yeah.
A question I had was on, so are there control structures that we should consider to put in place with this change that we wouldn't have an opportunity to once they've built the road? I wasn't certain.
This is really the only work that I think is constrained to the MnDOT construction project. Any control structures on the upstream side connecting to these pipes along Old Hudson Road over to the lake itself, where we currently have our control structure, could be done at any time, just recognizing there would be its own elements of disruption to things that are the ditch or the roadway or the bank of the lake, things like that. But this is really just limited to the things we need to do as a part of this MnDOT project.
And as a follow-up question, would we also encourage doing some sort of study for changing the flow out of Tanner's Lake as well, if we're making some of these changes, thinking down the line? I mean, is it worthwhile re-looking and doing a study to see what's possible in that area?
I think at some point in the future, you want to go back to, again, your prioritization kind of framework and see when it made sense to do that, given we've got 4 homes in the floodplain on Tanner's, and when should we be addressing those? At this point, we're working our way through the list of flood-prone structures, but this is on that list for sure. So at some point, yes. But it wouldn't have to be done as a part of this particular effort.
And would the $370,000 hit all this calendar year, or would it be spread, just out of curiosity?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
Nicole, do you know the schedule for this project? She's still here. I don't know if it's being constructed
Hi.
this year. Is this MnDOT's project being constructed in 2022?
I'd have to look back at the notes on that. I don't, maybe. I know Gold Line is not going to be starting. I'll have to look at my notes.
Okay.
I don't remember if it was this year or next year.
Well, it says
Probably-
2022 that the project is supposed to start, and it's complicated by the gold line that we've talked about before, which is probably why they're doing it. So,
Yeah, there's some connections and things that are happening between their 2 projects as well.
Right.
I mean, most likely we would, earmark the money in 2022. We might not pay it till 2023, though.
Because how these things go, and maybe Tina, you can comment about the specifics. We actually pay based on them doing the work, finalizing the payment to their contractor doing it, and then they would issue some type of request from the district, essentially to reimburse them for what they paid. So even if they built it and paid the contractor, they may not send the district the bill in essence until 2023. So especially given where they're at in the planning process at this point. So
well,
And whose responsibility would the maintenance and upkeep be if we had 2 pipes in there and one of them's plugged?
we would my opinion would be it's MnDOT's responsibility for the pipes in the roadway, but we would want to clarify that at that point, just because now we've got money being contributed to it, which might muddy things up. So, but that's a good question, something to clarify.
I mean,
Diane?
I know I'm asking a lot of questions, Brad. I'm strongly in support of scenario 3. It for some reason, normally when we jump at opportunities that are really, really good, I'm not saying that this happened, but sometimes we overlook some things, which is why I'm just poking.
Yep.
It sounds like it could be highly advantageous, even if we were going to seek the benefits 10 years down the road.
Yeah, I would personally, I would hate to get 10 years down the road and say, I wish we'd done that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Diane
Agreed.
has a question
Yeah,
too.
Diane?
Not so much a question, but we've been reviewing reports and prioritizing and planning all the way the district top to bottom, very logically, I think, and very detailed. And we've also decided to catch some low-hanging fruits because they're cheap and easy. And this scenario 3 is why we keep some reserves. There are going to be things that come up that we would not have prioritized, but because it's going to save us money and we can see the need in the future, it makes sense to do it. So I strongly support scenario 3, and I'm not so sure it's going to take 20 years to figure out that we need to step up getting that water down. But it doesn't matter. If it's opened up, we should put in more than we think we need right now.
Okay.
Move this along.
Yes.
I would move that we support scenario 3 and continue to coordinate with MnDOT regarding this pipe replacement.
Second.
Seconded.
Okay. Any further discussion? Val, did you have a comment?
I don't understand the dynamics of putting in a 60-inch pipe and then a 24-inch downflow. If there's anything that would threaten those houses on Tanner, my rudimentary understanding of hydrant stuff is they wouldn't, but I figured you guys could confirm that that suspicion's correct.
I'll just confirm that the decision is correct. How's that? Yeah, we can talk
I'm
about
good
the
with that.
specifics if you'd like. If you'd like to. go into
No,
it.
I just wanted to make sure if as long as my gut's correct, then I'm still very happy with it.
I had an instructor in college that says, you know why I picked that size? Because it's the right size. So, yeah, it's the right size.
All right, any further discussion? Okay, Tina, we have a motion and a second. Can you call the roll?
Yep, Cliff,
Aye.
Diane,
Aye.
Val.
Aye.
And Larry.
Aye. Thank you all. Thanks, Brad. It's always tough to pick up somebody else, so you did a nice job. Thank you. Item number 8, the attorney report. Lauren.
Hi, everybody. This month, we published notice for the annual meeting, which is coming up next month in March. This year is a year that the Watershed District advertises for or solicits proposals for engineering, legal, and accounting services. So that has been published in the newspaper, and the proposals are due later this month, and you'll be able to review them at your next meeting and vote to appoint for those positions. Other than that, things have been pretty quiet. I've worked on a few agreements for upcoming CIP related projects, just kind of working with Dave to get things in place before the spring comes. So that's my report.
Okay, thank you. Anything else going on with meetings or stuff at the Capitol that you're aware of?
No, not
Okay.
that I'm aware of, not that I'm involved with.
Are you sure you're an attorney?
I am.
When you give me a one-word answer, I'm starting to think you're an attorney.
That's
I've never
fair.
had one who can give a one-word answer before.
At least I didn't say, well, that depends, Larry. That's
Yeah.
a classic lawyer answer. It helps no one.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Next is item 9, moving into item 10, which is wetlands. We continue this discussion. And we have Karen Wold online and the presentation on the district wetlands discussion.
Yeah, I don't know, Brad, were you gonna intro anything or?
Yeah, I'll just kick this off. We had the discussion last month, and I think what it led to in our mind was we need to go back and first make sure you have the flooded wetland report that was done in 2019, and then be able to better explain what goes into the MinRam functional assessment method. Because we use it for, and we even heard Nicole mention it for the permitting process to establish our quality classifications for the wetlands across the entire district. And that then drives, what buffer regulations we regulate too. So felt as though we should use that flooded wetlands report as kind of a kickoff point. And that's why we put that in here to explain how we use the MinRam system. And then Karen Wald, who has helped the district, she's from Bar, has been involved with those MinRam assessments throughout the course of using it at the district. And she knows it far better than I do. And so she's here to answer your questions about the specifics. So we can start with, we don't have a formal presentation. We are here to answer questions about the memo that was put in the packet. Tina did a nice summary of bullet points of the essence of the, if you look at the details between 2013 and 2019 of the wetlands that were looked at, that's the essence of the changes. I know last month we talked more about just the fact that none of them changed from our management classification A to B or B to C, but this gives more of the specifics of what was found in MinRam and that assessment effort that was put in 2019 for those same wetlands we talked about last month.
Okay. I have a bunch of questions. Anybody
Yes.
else? Anything?
I do as well. You can kick us off.
Okay. Well, my first question is, and since this was done in the Grass Lake area, which was added to the watershed in 2013, the first question is, when a wetland, and I'm going to use wetland A, when a wetland changes its structure, it still maintains managed A, but it changes the characteristics of the wetland. And managed A is supposed to be preserve and protect. It's supposed to be, you got a wetland there, you keep it in the same condition. I've read all the definitions for what that means, but when all of a sudden it changes because of probably additional stormwater coming into it or something that isn't as natural as normal, how is that accounted for in the management of wetlands? Again, to me, it's preserve and protect, but if you put a lot of water on a wetlands, and this has to do with flood storage more than anything else, put a lot of water on a wetlands and you don't take it off, or you don't have any way of getting it off, that doesn't really fall into preserve and protect as far as I'm concerned. So I'm trying to figure out what is the logic behind that we have for taking, as you put in this thing, from shallow marsh and wet meadow to open water community. That's functionally changing the wetlands. So we haven't preserved and protected it. We've changed it. And it's still wet, I get that, but it isn't the same as it was before. Following question was that, is it said, one of the really good things about this is it kills invasive species, species. But if the wetland goes back and dries out, which it is doing, those species are going to come right back. So it hasn't really accomplished anything. It's just drowned them temporarily until they come back. So it doesn't really account that. I think one of Bill's reports someplace said, if you really want to change it, you got to burn it down. And I get that. I think that's the right thing to do. So what I'm trying to figure out with this is, when we look at this and we go through and we do the MinRam, and I read all that stuff about doing it, I understand it. When that wetland changes its characteristics, even though it's still a managed A, it isn't the same wetland as it was before. So how does that work with preserve and protect?
So I'll start with my more high-level response, and Karen can jump in about the specifics. But I would say within Manage A, it does allow for some different characteristics. And those characteristics, even though the flooded condition may have changed some of them, they were still within what would be considered a preserve and protect wetland. So it's when you assess and gather data that goes into the MinRam system that shows that it does change from a shallow marsh to a different characteristic. It doesn't say it doesn't change at all, but it's still in that higher quality Manage A classification. So
Yeah, I realize it's it's still in the classification to get that, but it has changed it. It's
it has
changed
changed it.
life, it's changed the,
Let me throw one thing out too. If you had as much time looking at wetlands in the district as I have, almost 40 some years, naturally, even under normal rainfall climatic conditions, our wetlands change dramatically from decade to decade. And sometimes they are a shallow marsh, sometimes they become open water, and after a few dry years, they go back to a wet meadow or shallow marsh. And that happens naturally, not just from flooding conditions like what happened with Wetland A. And I believe Wetland A will revert to what it was. It'll just be a period of time when groundwater levels drop to the point where that water can infiltrate again. And it doesn't change the fact that they're still valuable and they have good characteristics as a diverse plant community and aquatic habitat. So in fact, I've got an example right here next to me where I have some what we call seasonally flooded basins. They're typically only wet in the springtime. When you have snow melt, fills it up with a little water, pretty soon the water's gone. Well, in actuality, in the last 3 years, those wetlands have held water all year long. And you could maintain that, okay, that's changing the character of that wetland, but we don't do anything about it. You just let it fluctuate. That's the natural scheme of things.
yeah, and I get fluctuation. I understand that Wetland A has done that since I've lived here. And
Yeah.
I've lived here for 22 years, but sometimes it gets it's never had this happen to it. And in fact, before the district took it, the plan for this has a section on wetlands that says, and I quote, wetland level fluctuations, peak elevation and duration for wetlands shall be limited to 2 feet and duration not exceeding 48 hours so as to prevent the destruction of wildlife habitat and wetland vegetation. Do we have a rule like that? Because that was in the plan for the Grass Lake area. And obviously what happened out in Wetland A wouldn't meet that. It's way 2 feet right now.
I recall the 48-hour standard applying to infiltration basins, but not
Right.
not the wetland.
Right, that's for man-made basins. Is that what we're talking about?
No, it's
Oh, really?
it's the wetland elements. It specifically refers to wetland alteration.
That's
Right,
not
so if
permanent.
somebody was proposing to change an outlet on a wetland or change what I would call the normal water level of a wetland, that's where the state requires that there not be allowed, a certain amount. When you have a landlocked basin like Wetland A, that's different. That's not how those rules are applied, but.
Well, but again, Wetland A is impacted by a number of storm sewers that dump
Mhm.
area that predate, I get it, predate the RWMW taking it over. But there's also a comment in here that you may have to look at those and look at them. And if you've ever been out right after a rainstorm, or sometimes if you're unfortunate enough in a rainstorm, to see the little pipe, which I suppose about 15 inches under Snail Lake Road, not Boulevard, Road, the water comes gushing out of there. You probably remember, Tina and Cliff, that John Ovanabi wrote a letter saying, gosh, the water's shooting out of there so much it's taken the walkway away. So there's a lot of water that's coming in north of this road that probably needs to be buffered so that the wetland can help recover itself. But it isn't just arguing about wetland A. That's not what I'm about. What I'm about is looking at wetlands. And when we're talking about, as we go through this, using them for flood storage. When we use them for flood storage, we change them. Last year, yeah, Maud had this resolution to try, it was mischaracterized from my point of view. Cliff, I think you were in the meeting. The resolution was to allow the people up north to negotiate with the DNR to put extra water into the wetlands. I disagreed with that, but we lost the vote slightly, and it came out to be that we were okay with putting water in wetlands. That's not what it said, but that's the idea behind this, is if you're going to put water someplace for any reason that changes the characteristics for wetlands, and we don't have that many of them, that we need to have a policy and a procedure for getting rid of them. I don't see that, but maybe it's there and I just don't see it.
Well, there's a couple of things I think that as a board you have to manage. First of all, whether, there's natural fluctuations in wetlands, and I understand in flood years, those fluctuations are more extreme than you would expect them to be. Like Cliff said, like the wetland by his house too, 3 years of extended water. But then there's also the trade-offs. So that's the other consideration, that as a board, when you're looking at the risk from flooding and the risk to a wetland, those are the decisions that need to be made when there's a way for us even to control it. In most places, it's natural. It's a natural overflow. It's natural, or it's unnatural, but it's built into the system of how our storm sewers in an urban setting are built.
If we go way back to the district's first analysis of wetlands, we looked at what wetlands existed back in about 1940, 35, somewhere in that area. We had first ever aerial photos done of the district, and they were in stereo. If you've ever seen stereo air photographs, they're really interesting. But we identified every single wetland that existed in 1935 or 40. And then we went back and identified how many of them are gone or changed. And a significant percentage were gone because they've been developed. And as you develop an urban area, suburban area, now urban, all that new development, all those roadways, the water has to go somewhere. So, and back until in the 90s, we weren't prohibited from just shunting a storm sewer into a wetland. So wetlands became our storage areas.
Right.
And they became ponds and open water wetlands where they never were before. But some were preserved and they were used for stormwater ponds. And if we adopted the attitude that we should go back and restore all those, we couldn't. Physically, it'd be impossible. Because we're stuck with a system now that's storm sewers and roadways connected to wetlands, and there's a lot more stormwater runoff, obviously, and that water has to go somewhere, and the remaining wetlands and low areas are what collects that water. And as we found in the Snail Lake area, once those areas filled up and there's no really good conveyance system, and we're working on improving that, but the water gets stuck there. And until we have a dry several years, and hopefully this year will be another drier year, and things will settle down, the groundwater will drop, and those areas can infiltrate and things will go back to normal. And I think they will. It's just a matter of fluctuation. Sometimes it takes a decade, sometimes it only takes a couple of years, but all our wetlands now are impaired by development. There's no question about it. We have a few still very nice wetlands, and they're classified as our wetland A's, and we're hoping to keep them that way. But so we don't fill them, we don't dredge them, we don't do things like that, but they can still absorb a lot of floodwater. And that is one of the functional values, as Karen can probably say, that is assessed in the MinRam method, is does that have some value in storing stormwater runoff and flood management. And so that is one of the benefits of having them around. So
Yeah, and I get that, and am basically supportive of it. My concern is that we have some kind of a policy or process for making sure that when we store water in a wetlands, that it'll get itself out. Like when we went up north with what is it, Purgatory, something or other up there, that they hold the water for the Red River so it doesn't flood, and then they let it out. But when I looked at, it was either Vlamo, I think it was Vlamo, that has a weirs that they hold the water upstream, and then when they're done, they let it out. Do we have a standard for wetlands that's that way? If we're going to flood them, we've talked before about flooding things like baseball fields and things like that. The question is, how fast does it go back so that we don't, in storing the flood water, we don't ruin the condition of the wetlands as it stands right now. This isn't just normal fluctuation. This is because, again, out here, I've walked across this thing in boots and all that sort of stuff, and it would go up by a foot or foot and a half, something like that, and then go back down again. It's just when it was overwhelmed with water coming gushing in from Grass Lake and coming gushing in from the storm sewers up there, they couldn't handle it anymore. And do we have other places that are like this, that we have an obligation of stewardship, maybe not legality, but at least stewardship, to say that we need to always keep that in mind, that we want to have time zero be what we see out there, how the wetland is functioning, how it moves back and forth. And if it comes outside of those parameters, like what that 2 feet in 48 hours is aiming at, if it goes outside of that function, then we do something. And I'm not asking for an answer tonight, by the way. This is
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be nearly impossible to manage wetlands in that way across the district, based on the climate conditions, right? So if we're not proposing to, the difference would be if we were proposing to say, we are going to take this wetland and change the outlet so that it stores more water and can't get out until it reaches a different elevation. That's where that 2 feet comes into play. And those are rules through the DNR and Bowser. And that has come into play. We've looked at that for flood storage in wetlands. We have looked at that in the past as a method of reducing risk from flooding. But that's the bounds that's set at when we look at those situations. So when we're looking at a time where we are putting in new controls or doing something different to an area, that is something we definitely should be taking into consideration. But because we have excess rain events is not, that's where it's more of a district wide, and we couldn't go in and, change something about that.
Well, okay. So in the report, it also says if the flooded conditions are expected to remain for long term, the installation of additional stormwater management pre-treatment areas could provide improvements to stormwater attenuation, wetland water quality, and downstream quality. That's kind of what I'm looking for too, is that as we go through and we make decisions about, as we're working through flood stuff, is that we also look at retrofitting so that the accumulation of things that have been done in the past don't materially change the characteristic of the wetlands, because they're doing whatever they're doing. For whatever reason, we don't have the thousands and thousands of frogs in this wetland that used to come trotting across my yard. Maybe it's a normal cycle thing. I think it's because they used to live out there where the low point is and there's water, and they bred. Believe me, if you open your window at night, you can hear them breeding. It kind of changed that characteristic. We used to have turtles out there. We don't have. So I'm not. My point isn't about that. My point is that if you have a policy that says we're going to dump water into any wetlands, getting that wetland back to its original condition seems to be an imperative. And I don't see that as an imperative right now.
So my
The one
question-
challenge I see, Larry, and we've used this MNRAM assessment method for many years. It's essentially the only method that was accepted by Bowser for many, many years. So I'm just, I'm looking at how would we know when a change is too much where we have to correct it, I guess, without an assessment method that is different than what we use now. That's what comes to mind. I'm not asking you that question, but I'm just kind of questioning out loud, because we kind of need, because there's always going to be, as Cliff said, there's going to be changes that occur naturally. How do we know when a change is too much? And right now, all we have is really the functional assessment method through MNRAM to say, okay, it's been too much, or it's still within the range. So that's what comes to mind for me anyway. Cliff?
Something Larry said before about making modifications and making sure we stick to a standard. Whenever we do modeling in a system where we have creeks, pipes, ponds, and lakes, we evaluate any change based on its effect on all those different systems. So if, for example, we wanted to put a control structure on Casey Lake to hold more water back, we would evaluate based on our modeling how much that would bounce Casey Lake and the impacts of that bounce. And well, like our managed outlet structures now for Keller Channel and Phelan Lake, we know what the impact's going to be based on different management approaches. We can pool more water up, but then we say we're going to let it out at some point. And so where we have some control, some management ability, we do look at those things. It's where we have landlocked basins and items that are out of our control. That's where we don't have a standard, because that's it's what you call it Mother Nature or whatever you want. But if there were, for example, something happening in a certain basin where it was caused by say maybe a water system breakage or something, where hundreds of thousands of gallons a day are flowing into this basin that never were there and it's man-made, then we work with the city to fix their system, and then we figure out how we can get that water back out. But that wasn't the situation for Wetland A, although there was problems with the system. So we looked at what the problems were and what overflowed and how can we correct that? Can we improve downstream drainage? And we did that. So I think the system works. The result and what's residual may not be to everybody's liking. It's obviously not, but what can we do about it? It's not controlled.
Yeah, the question comes, and again, just using this area up here because I know it. We put in a really unique pumping system, I think, on on Crestview to move water around to take that water that was potentially imperiling homes and move it out of next to Grass Lake, under the road, over the, and so on and so forth. We don't have anything like that for Wetland A, yet we have plans in place that if we get a big rain and Snail Lake overflows, it's going to dump into Wetland A. And if Grass Lake overflows for some reason, even though we've made improvements, it'll dump into Wetland A. But we don't seem to have a plan to get it out of Wetland A. And this must not be the only place where that happens. I don't know that that's true or not, but I know it's true here. So my question, my real concern is, how can we build that in? When we talk about preserve and protect, what do we really mean by that? Do we mean when we go out and we do the MinRam, and I understand the MinRam assessment. So we go out and do the MinRam assessment. This is what we expect this wetland to be. We know there are going to be fluctuations within there. There's probably a certain band that we can tolerate, or the wetland can tolerate, not us. The wetland can tolerate and still be within its known parameters. But if something happens, and you use the example, it's a good one, what if water breaks? Then we have to go out and say, okay, artificial, we've dumped it in. We dump in now with storm sewers and with overflows and things like that. What kind of policy do we have, or should we have, to say this was an unusual event? We need to return this to its normal configuration. We in fact tried with Wetland A with northern dewatering, pumping the heck out of it, but there was no place for it to go, so it was kind of a lost cause at that point. But it's going forward. All of the potentials that the Beltline Resiliency Study talked about have to do with flood storage, and it often has to do with flood storage in a wetland. Yes, the wetland, a lot of them, and the permits we were talking about, presumably we got that under control. They will drain themselves if it comes up. But what about ones that won't drain themselves? Do we have a handle on that? Do we take core samples, for example, out of wetlands to determine what the drainage characteristics is, and then have rules about how those apply? That's where my questions come in about this kind of stuff. That was pretty exciting.
Well, so
I just
I'll
don't
just
know
add-
how. Go ahead, Tina.
I was just going to add one more thing as you've been talking, thinking about the stormwater that gets into it and how those systems are built into that. And now if there's new systems in place, we have a lot of control over, what goes to a wetland and what doesn't, or more, I should say, guidance on that. But our permitting program also helps try to backtrack on some of those. So when there's redevelopment, we have requirements for volume reduction, rate control, and water quality control, right? So we do have some things in place that try to mitigate for those changes in our watershed. I get what you're talking about now is different, but I just wanted to bring that up too as a point about one of the ways that we try to preserve and protect is through our rules and our stormwater requirements.
Yep. Yeah, I get that, and I think that they're well written, and I understand them because I've read them many, many times. My concern, if you will, is as we go through this, and as we have things like we talked in the permits around wetlands and things like this, they're going to change some of the characteristics, and our obligation, I think, is Victoria Shores is a good example of that. Is we can't do everything. The laws aren't written that way, but if we have a stewardship responsibility for these, we may have internal rules that allow us to look at wetlands to make up our own, even though we're not required to do it, make up our own so that we maintain them in the condition that they are as much as possible. I think that my personal opinion is that should be one of the objectives the board and the watershed should have longer term. And it's not to say that the bad job has been done. It's just that I'm still struggling with what does preserve and protect mean when you can go from a wetland that is like a wet marsh and and all of a sudden it's flooded and now it's a community.
Open water.
Our rules don't
Different.
really-
And you're right, Cliff. My guess is this summer, this is going to all dry up. And if it all dries up, it's not a community anymore. So
Sure it is. Sure it is. Absolutely it is. Wetlands change all the time. And I think there's a difference here in terms of our perspective of what is a wetland. And our rules say that we actually preserve and protect all wetlands. It's not just the wetland A's or the A classification. It's all of them. And the fact we can't have a policy that restricts change in wetlands because change happens naturally. And as we have climate change, it's going to happen more and more. So we can't have a policy that says we are to preserve a certain type of wetland in that particular specific location in perpetuity, because we can't. We just physically, it's possible. So we have to allow systems to flex and flow. And what Tina said is exactly what I think the district is about, is that we recognize there's been faults in the past with how development occurred, and storm sewers put in where we realize they're causing problems, roadways that are interrupting flow, all kinds of things happen. But now we have rules that say that if you are going to develop, you have to hold some water on your site. You have to either infiltrate it or filter it, and you have to maintain a certain level of water quality of output of your stormwater and a quantity of stormwater as well. So, I mean, we've instituted those rules, but the district has only been around doing that for a short period of time. So as development changes over decades, as things get redeveloped, we'll catch up on that, but it's a very, very slow process. But we can't regulate requiring restoration when there aren't any opportunities for restoration. And we can't pay for everything. So
That's true.
Some of it. So,
But I would like to my gut feeling is that we ought to take a look at the wetlands. And that was another question I had, is that we looked at the wetlands in the Grass Lake area because we asked for it. But it's been a long time since the inventory of wetlands has been done, as far as I can tell. Are we going back and looking at the other wetlands and seeing how they're surviving? I think we even talked about Casey Lake the last time. It's technically a wetland, like Grass Lake is a wetland.
Yeah, that's a good question. Karen, can you talk about frequency of MinRam assessments? And, you know, we right now we're not budgeted to do that. It's not to say we couldn't reassess, but Karen, I don't know if you have any guidance for how often those should be done.
Yeah, I think, you know, in general, it's always a good idea. And for Grass Lake, that was a specific situation because we knew that there were concerns about flooding that we wanted to compare. And we had the previous assessments from 2013 that were conducted during normal hydrology conditions. And so it was, you know, a good situation to use that comparison between normal and flooded conditions. I know the original assessments that were done throughout the rest of the district prior to Grass Lake were, you know, quite a while ago, 2003, 2006, or, you know, something like that, and over several years, I think. And in general, I would say it might be a good idea to do another review of that. However, knowing that the state of Minnesota and is working in coordination right now with the state of Wisconsin to evaluate, to come up with a new functional assessment methodology. It'll be a couple of years before that's actually ready to use. And it'll be using, more updated techniques and methodology after a pretty thorough review process. So I would suggest waiting until that's in place, unless there's a particular area that you're concerned about. You'd be comparing, you wouldn't be able to compare the old MinRam specifically to the new functional assessment methodology because they're going to be different. But I would still, because MinRam's been around for 20 years or more, I would still wait until we have a new functional assessment methodology in place to use that, is my recommendation.
At one point in time, since we did the assessment in the early 2000s, we did do a sampling. Can't remember what year that was, where maybe it was 2013. It might have been at the same time that we did the Grass Lake ones. We did a sampling of other wetlands throughout the district to see how much they had changed. And we had said if they had changed significantly, or if there was a certain, I don't remember what our number was, a percent of change, then we would explore doing a full new assessment. And at that time, it was very minimal change in assessment or in classification. So we didn't move forward with a full assessment. But that is something we could explore again. We could grab some representative wetlands throughout the district and evaluate again and see if there's been change, I guess.
I would doubt that there is, personally. I mean, I would think if there's any significant changes, we'd hear from somebody about it.
Yeah, and I mean, the way we use the MinRam assessment is for wetland buffer. That's how our ultimate goal in preserving, protecting is acreage of wetland, right? Because we know that all wetlands, whether they are managed A or managed C, provide a lot of benefits to our watershed. And so, and there's not a lot of open land left, that would be changed by a change in buffer requirement. So there is that weighing of if what we would get from that would be beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to, you could implement some additional hydrology guidelines when you have a permit application in front of you. If you wanted to change your rules to include typically it's you use the HydroCAD to show whether or not you're meeting certain bounce and inundation hydrology guidelines, but that would have to be a change in your rules.
And
that's when a permit is in front of you, for a new project, which this is not the case.
It's very few.
Yeah, again, it'd be looking for opportunities. I get the fact, I've read enough and experienced enough to know the wetlands come and go and come up and down. But it's more when it's impacted by artificial means. I think way back when I sent out an article by Dennis Anderson in the Star Tribune about the fact that a lot of these wetlands were not useful for wildlife because of the artificial flows that had come into, probably more that was with drainage up in the north of here with farms and things. The same thing happens. We don't have that many. Pam isn't here, so I'll say to her, for her, we want to preserve every single inch of wetland that we possibly can. But we also, I think, want to keep it in a condition that is as natural as it can be. And if there are opportunities, I remember, I haven't had a chance to find it, but a long time ago, we had something about buffers, and it was pretty cheap, buffer stuff that you could use at the outlet of storm sewers to hold the water back before you dumped it into the wetlands, so it would come in more reasonably. That's the kind of stuff I would like us to start taking a look at, to say, do we have opportunities when something comes up, or maybe just because, to actually positively impact wetlands and protect them from the sins of the past.
Well,
So
for example, we don't allow any direct discharge of stormwater anymore into wetlands. Period. So we made
Anymore.
And that's one of the goals of our stewardship grant program too, is to do those, you know, that's what rain gardens do, anything that can
Right.
hold that water back. So,
Right.
yeah.
I asked about that before because I wanted to, you know, this would be a great place to put a rain garden down so people could see it. The answer was, we want rain gardens up near the roadway. But that's the kind of thing I would like to see develop to enhance and protect and preserve the wetlands that we have. Because if we get another big storm, that it could impact more than wetland A or Grass Lake or the wetlands around here. It could impact some of those other ones too. Do they all drain off? The issue is, when we have big storms, they're not uniform. It doesn't rain that much across the entire wetland. So maybe the next time we get a big one like we had before, it'll hit Tanner's Lake or something like that. And
Well, so that's a question then, I guess, as a follow-up to what you're saying is, I mean, so when we build controls like rain gardens, those are for small events, right? They're not for the big ones.
Right.
When we have big events like what you're talking about, or what we experienced over the last several years, we need massive storage, right? Like that's in order to mitigate for that. And so there's two ways that we try to address that, right? Through flood storage and then through water quality and small storm management. So I think we have policies in place that address that, but I hear what you're saying about needing more specific, and to me it feels like a case by case, you know, and we talked about this with the Grass Lake area as we were making our changes. And we were real clear about what that meant for where the water went. And I'm also hearing you say that, you know, what's our responsibility? Well, we weren't able to get it out, like you said, because of the conditions. And now it is getting back to a more normal condition. So those are definitely good. These are all good discussion points to consider as we.
I really support looking at this from a district policy perspective. And I think that normally happens when we update our watershed management plan. So I would think the board should focus on that. And I think your thoughts, Larry, are positive. And as we get to that point, and we just have to look at it as it affects the entire district. And what would the impact of this kind of policy be on everybody? So it takes a bit of deliberation, and we just really have to look at it from the practical standpoint of what is doable and what is reasonable, and what can we enforce through our rules. And that's where it comes down to.
Oh, you're muted, Larry.
Larry, you're muted.
Muted because my dog got let out by my wife. Sorry for that. We'll have a talk later. You know, a couple of years ago, we started, before everything got derailed by COVID, we were going to take a look at these issues and look at re-upping some parts of the the plan, if you will. I think we need to go back to that. I understand everything got derailed in COVID. We didn't know whether we were coming or going. Not that we do now, but we knew a lot less then. And so I think if we go back, we'll see that we had an action step probably in 2019 to look at the management plan and update parts and pull together some of the parts around wetlands. So I think that would be a good thing to take another look at that again.
For some reason, I thought we were planning to do that this year. Anyway, am I remembering that incorrectly?
For a plan update?
Yeah, just curious. For some reason, I thought.
No, I don't think so. So we're not due for a plan update for 5 years, 2027, but in all actuality, we'll probably start the process in about 2 years for the full 10-year plan update. I think we usually take about 3 years of planning and to go through that whole process. But yeah, certainly we can, I don't know that I would necessarily go through a plan amendment at this point since we're so close to that, but we definitely could start taking chunks of the plan and having discussions around that so that it's all ready to go and plug it in when we're ready.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea. I can go back. I haven't had time to go back and find out remind myself what we were planning on doing. I just remember it because I have a notebook with the basic plan in it with all kinds of little flags on it of things that should be clarified. It's not that it's bad. It's a wonderful plan. In fact, kudos to the people that put it together because it's the most comprehensive thing I've ever encountered. But there are these kind of issues, I think, that this would be a good time to take a look at them and start that process over again. So we don't just ourselves in 5 years.
Yeah, I know that. I think especially around policy decisions and discussions. I mean, the meat of that plan is data and information, but that's the policy things that need to come from this board that we could start addressing.
So I have significantly more rudimentary questions than what just occurred.
Okay.
And I just was hoping somebody could help provide me some insight. So I tried to read through the MRAM document itself to understand what preserve means from that level. And I was curious. I thought I recall reading that you could be a preserve if at least one of the following characteristics in that large calculation was high, exceptional, varying on the calculation. But really, you just needed to meet one of those conditions to be considered preserve. Did I interpret that correctly?
Yeah, there's a flow chart that you go through. So each of those individual functional ratings. So say there's 14 different functions that are rated in the MinRAM, and there's a flow chart that you follow. If you look at the comprehensive guidance of the MinRAM instructions, you're going to go through that flow chart. And so, yeah, if you hit an exceptional or high rating, typically that does put it into that category A.
I found a really nice textual description of the flow chart in one of the documents on the MRAM, and I think what I was interested in, and I know this was earlier and when Larry's based questions, but I was trying to figure out when I think about wetlands themselves, the closest thing I could jump to is like human body modeling and when something's sick. And so I think when we see, let's say something's exceptional, that wouldn't, when you're in your health, if you see something's exceptional, you don't just assume that person's healthy. You would still look at the blood pressure, you'd look at the weight, you look at all these other pieces. And so I'm kind of curious if the flow chart jumps us to the, to preserve A based off of something being exceptional. Should we go back and look at some of those other changes and see separately if, for example, the hydraulic regimen, am I saying that right? No.
Regime, yeah.
Saying it right.
Regime, yeah.
Thank you. If metrics like that, or if metrics like the attenuation deserve a second look, as an example. And I was curious. I do appreciate this was very helpful. But wondering if we jump out at one thing being an exception, but then we have another thing at a medium or a low, and it's consistent that way, is there a reason to go back and revisit what we should do from a management standpoint?
Yeah, if you're seeing and seeing something consistently that doesn't make sense, you can certainly make some adjustments. I know we did that for the Valley Branch Watershed District. We kept getting high ratings for amphibian habitat on some wetlands that really were not high quality, ended up being, in that preserved category. And so then we added an additional requirement for that category to be rated high. It had to also have at least medium vegetative diversity and integrity. That was, and we did that when we looked at our entire inventory and saw, a lot of this type of wetland is getting, the proportion, it was out of proportion. So that's something that you could look into doing if you wanted to tweak this. This is just an example of a flow. There are several different flow charts. There's also another flow chart that you could use that it has 4 different categories instead of 3 different categories. But this is the one that you're using in your rules. I keep saying you, but I should clarify that I am a resident of the watershed, Ramsey-Washington Watershed District.
Oh, and just because, now that we're all kind of getting comfortable with Zoom, do you mind if I share a screen really quickly? I just wanted to show you what I was looking at, just to make sure it was not wrong, because I promise you, all my Googling, there were some things that I found that did not make, I knew I was in the wrong area. But I was looking at this description here. I think that came out on the which reflected at least one of the flow charts, but I really thought it helped me mentally place in, like, okay, so to be preserved, you just need to really tick one of these boxes, right, as you're going through, and which I understand why, right? You're trying to manage and preserve the exceptional piece. I think
that's about the same as the flow chart that I was just showing.
Yeah, and for some reason this worked in my mind early easier, but the line of questioning that made me think is, when I look at the changes that were in that stream of documents, some of them did change in other areas, and I was curious if you see a trend, if you're low, right? For example, if you have high blood pressure a bunch of times, but yet your weight's steady, you probably have hypertension, right? But you're not going to classify that individual as a healthy individual if this consistent metric keeps going. And I'm not saying that the body is the perfect example for wetlands, but I do think there's some really good analogies between that. So I'm curious if there is metrics here when I look, and I'll stop sharing because it's useless for me to share that again. Are there triggers that we should be using in that metric to lead us down the path that I believe where Larry was going, where it's like, okay, so the attenuation's been high, it's changed substantially, it's still technically a manage A because we hit this one exceptional, but is there another trigger there that we should talk about?
Certainly. I mean, if you get additional information indicating that there's the system is overwhelmed, or you have too much nutrient or too much sediment accumulation, when you have some of those ratings can be even worse. I don't know if you looked at the ratings that are shown in those data sheets. there's like an A, B, and C for each of those different questions. So, you know, if the answer to some of those questions is a B rating, but then it, you know, conditions are getting even worse and it ends up being a C rating, that eventually will bring all those individual functional ratings that have, you know, multiple calculations going into them. Eventually you will get down to a lower category for the wetland.
Yeah,
I think the other thing that you have to take into account is length of time, right? So we did this assessment in 2019, and if you did it this summer, again, the ratings or the rating probably won't change. It'll still probably be a manage a wetland, but some of those answers are going to change because the situation is different. So when you're talking about, we don't want to see significant changes, over what time frame are we talking? And
yeah, and that's
Yeah.
why I pointed out the numerical changes, because sometimes, you know, there's a breakdown in high, medium, and low categories for each of these functions, and they're based on the numerical ratings. So you might see a very slight change in the numerical rating that would indicate that there's a problem, but it didn't quite make, you know, that jump from being, you know, high to medium or medium to low yet. So that would be an indication if you see those numerical rating changes.
Yeah, and
Karen,
honestly, you gave me way too much data to where I could be a big nerd on it. So I just want to preface it with that. But I would say that there is a bias toward preserve in this particular instance if you know there is good vegetation and life there, and I get that. I'm just curious, as we approach maybe some of the topics that Larry had brought up, maybe there's some signal in that noise with the small little shifts that would be nice to tease out a little bit. And that's really the point I was going to make.
Yeah, I think
and also I wanted to bring up the point that that President Swope mentioned with if we do get some more consistency in hydrology in wetland A, all of that vegetation planting and work that's being done is gonna be a benefit. So it's already showing, you know, a vegetative diversity integrity increase because of that, and then it will help, you know, to stabilize that condition too. But again, you know, you don't want to overwhelm the system, and then the benefit of having the reed canary grass drown out is that it's an invasive species. But then, you know, the point that President Swope mentioned is you just leave it alone and the reed canary grass will come back in drier conditions. So that's why it's really great that you're doing all that work to plant natives in place there so that you don't have the invasive species coming back.
I would say too that the MinRAM, you know, we should consider how it's applied in our rules versus like a board inventory of what, you know, improvements to be made. Because if you start to tease out and parse out a lot of that flow chart information, there's a higher likelihood you're going to be lowering management classes versus increasing them, which by our rules would result in more narrow buffers. So I would just caution that, you know, for a project, you know, implementation strategy, I think it's good, but I think the flow chart in its simplistic form is meant to be conservative, right, Karen?
Yeah, I mean,
I would agree with that.
It reads that way, frankly. It's more of like,
Yeah.
I'm happy with the conservatism, but there's still good signal there, is kind of in my mind what happens. I don't want to change how it's ranked.
Consequences, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I would read that saying it's still a good wetlands, but it's not the same wetlands as it was before. And sort of my philosophical question, is that okay? And particularly with storm sewers dumping in, if we get more rain like we did before, this could impact a lot of them and change them. And, you know, the characteristics of them may be that they can't recover, and that will change things. Like our coyotes don't have anywhere to bed down anymore. They're still out there someplace, but they
I'd
don't
like to
bed
add
down
one
where they
thing
used to.
that in our analysis in the past, and in fact, I remember Bill and Brad and a few others having this conversation, that we found some very high quality wetlands that had significant stormwater inputs. And we were perplexed by the fact that that condition existed. So there are a lot, in fact, like I said before, most of our wetlands have stormwater inputs, and it doesn't necessarily mean, well, we found examples where it wasn't all bad. There were some situations where we definitely found sedimentation and too much flow and that kind of problem, but our wetlands basically exist at this point because of stormwater inputs. It's just the way we've developed. Anyway.
And I get
I just
that.
want to clarify something that, what Nicole said made me feel like you guys interpreted my questioning is like we should change the man. It's more of really, if I don't like, and this is no dig on you, Larry, I don't like words like okay, it's fine and stuff like that. How do we build metrics to help us understand it? That's all I was trying to get at, is there's clearly signal there and I don't want to lose it.
Fair enough.
Hey, Karen.
Diane.
Yeah, I have just some questions, but before I get into those, and I don't have that many, Tina, could you show that video I sent?
Yeah. If I can find the video now, hold on.
This is to give us some context in our discussion.
Okay, just a second, it's loading. Let me get shared. Whoops, where did it go? Do you see it?
No,
No.
there we go.
Oh, you could, sorry. Let me get it back. Why? I don't know why it's doing that.
This is a video of the overflow of Grass Lake into Wetland A. And boy, I wish it looked like that. But anyway, it's the last time it happened. It happened more than once.
Where was this located, Diane, did you say?
It was the Grass Lake water coming across Ramsey and into Wetland A.
What year was this?
Huh?
Like, I was curious what the date was or what year that was.
Yes, that was September 22nd, 2016.
2016. Okay. Yep.
Yeah. So it was the last one. There was also one in August and then also the year before too.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
So you still
Did you-
bringing it up?
Oh, couldn't you see it?
No,
No,
we had a beautiful
Sorry.
picture from Alaska or somewhere.
yeah.
I don't know what's going on here. Why it won't show. Let's try this. Do you see it now?
No, there we go.
Okay, you can.
Play. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So it was a lot of water that came in. By the time that finished, Wetland A was up 10 feet from its normal, which is 870, 872. It started going down a bit right away, but only went down to 876. And then in 2018, we installed the overflow from Grass Lake. And since there was still nowhere for Grass Lake water to go, it went through the overflow and filled back up again almost to its highest point. After that, it started going down slowly, but then when the outlet was put in, the A6, the outlet from West Vadnais, it has dropped really fast. And by this fall, it was down to 873.5. So it was a huge difference having somewhere for that water to go. But my point in showing you the video is that everybody's right about wetlands having bounce. And this one that we're talking about, or actually there's several, some of them have a huge bounce, but it was Grass Lake water coming in. It wasn't just rain or just the normal drainage. So it doesn't quite fit either in a man-made cause or in a natural cause. And that's why we keep having these difficult discussions about it. It was kind of a unique situation. But that happened. We fixed the drainage in a lot of ways. Grass Lake water now has somewhere to go. It also doesn't overflow as easy, even if it was to fill up. But that's what happened. So to my questions, Tina, you and others, and tonight have said it's going to go back to normal. Always thought that there is, although there isn't an outlet, there is a drainage south that happens, you know, below the ground. We see that. And the connections with Snail and Wetland A and Suzanne Pond and Grass Lake, it's all consistent. But if it's going back to normal, are the plantings that Bill's doing and that Paige is overseeing on Snail Lake, are they being done at the right elevation, or is it planned with the plants that it can go all the way down 10 feet, go back up a couple, back down, and it's all going to be working well?
Good question, Bill. You want to take that
Yeah.
one?
Yes and no. I'm not an attorney, but that's the answer. So some of the emergent plants that we installed at a higher elevation a couple years ago aren't going to do so well. But I think the seed bank that has been established over the last few years is quite viable, and we have a really good chance of seeing natives kind of migrate down as the water level goes down. And we have been doing a lot of seeding over the ice. Last year we broadcast probably 50 pounds of wetland seed. All in most areas, probably 50 to 100 feet off the shoreline, with the idea that if the water level dropped, we'd have a really nice seed bank ready to go in those conditions. So we're planning for that, but definitely some of the plants that we planted a couple years ago are not going to make it high and dry.
Well, and Tina, what do you think about Snail? You know, it got so low this year with the drought and with the natural resetting combined that it was within half foot of needing augmentation. So
Yeah, I was gonna say, we have a narrower band at Snail Lake because of that augmentation plan that they have in place. So that was definitely taken into account with those designs on Snail Lake. So similar to like what Bill was saying, we did extend plantings last year on Snail to address the lower water levels. So we've taken that into account there as well.
Thanks. Then would you pull up the still pictures that I sent? And I wanted to thank Karen and everybody for the pictures in the packet, because the 2013 to 2019 pictures, you can see the difference that it made when there wasn't so much attenuation. These aren't in order. This is after dead trees were cut down, and you can see the size of some of those stumps. And the next one.
It takes a second for it to go advance. If I'm going the right way. Okay, hold on. Sorry, this isn't cooperating as well as I had hoped. Oops. My picture viewer has froze. Let me reopen it here. Okay. You see that?
Yep.
Okay.
This is one of the areas, it's one of the east side of Wetland A, showing where the water had gone down this year. So leaving the debris. And then the last one.
Sorry, I don't know why it's so slow. Okay.
Okay, this is taken the same place that that first picture was. And that's me walking on the path there. So you can get an idea of some of the height and the number of the dead trees just in a small area. So that leads to my question, probably for Karen. You know, I understood that the drowning of the jewelweed is a good thing, but where's the balance? Here we have all these trees, and it was oaks and cherries and basswood and hackberry and silver maples and other maples like box elders, birch, poplar, elms, and lots of cottonwoods that were killed by being underwater for so many years or having the ice break the bark. And it wasn't just trees, all of the pollinator plants in that whole area, which was huge. There were huge swaths of jewelweed all summer that the hummingbirds liked. There were asters, there were just tons of wildflowers, some of which have been replanted now. So how do you balance a temporary drowning of canary grass with that kind of devastation that would take over 100 years to replace?
Well, I looked at the vegetation that was documented in 2013 and compared that with what we documented in 2019. And the species that were listed in 2013 were primarily dominant species were non-native invasive species. So jewelweed is a native species, and it can really take over and provide lots of good pollinator habitat, but it is an annual. I would say it's probably pretty likely that it would come back again. I don't think that jewelweed is gone forever if you get the hydrology again.
No, I just was using it as an example there, and Bill can attest to this. He's told us at meetings how unique this wetland is. There's a lot of different microclimates. There are dozens of kinds of flowers. The problem is, as Larry brought up earlier, you had a evacuation or killing off of amphibians and mammals and insects because of how fast it flooded. And I just didn't see MinRam covering this kind of situation, even though you could do your measurements in 2013 and again in 2019. It just doesn't seem to fit me. So
I don't know if those wooded areas were actually considered wetlands previously, were they?
well,
Right, the trees that you mentioned, most of those trees are upland trees or
Yeah.
right on the fringe of the wetland.
right, they were on the fringe, so with 10 feet of water, they got inundated. And that's why this is a different kind of situation from a really set of wet years that caused some pooling of water and trees to die in a wetland. This required us to make some changes in the drainage flow so it wouldn't happen again. So that's my point.
I don't think MinRam is meant to assess that, or it's not capable maybe of assessing. those-
Right, and that's
those
why I'm
peripheral-
saying it just doesn't really fit,
Yeah.
which kind of gets to Brad's question of how we know when there's too much change. Can it be when it's the result of something that is not within the range of a normal or extreme bounds? Or could it be when the change is going to be permanent? I mean, there's got to be some ways to define when we would know there's enough change that we need to make action or take action if possible. And we know that it wasn't possible at first in Wetland Day because we hadn't done all the other things that gave us a place for the Grass Lake water to go. So there wasn't any way to get rid of the Grass Lake water. But I do think it could be defined. And I'm hoping that there aren't situations like this in the future, but we're gonna have to think about a response if there is, and they have some kind of a definition that's consistent and makes good sense.
Yeah, and some of these questions, are things that might be good to bring up while we're coming up with new methodology for doing functional assessments as we're working through that with the technical committees. So that would be, something that we could certainly bring up.
I was going to say that I think that
Hasn't really been dealt with in the past.
I think those are great points. They're definitely of significance beyond our single district. So I was wondering whether or not in Tina's interactions with other districts and maybe bars with other watersheds, if this discussion should be amongst a broader audience. I think it.
Yeah, all of the watershed organizations in the Twin Cities have been dealing with flooding in the last few years.
Yeah. But in terms of the metrics and when do we define that it's an issue that's of significance to address, like Diane's saying. I think it's a great discussion. It's a difficult one. And I think more minds put into this, the better.
Yeah, for sure. I think where my mind goes to is, so if let's say we define that, and then what? Then what do we do with that information? There's a lot of factors, right, then that go into what could or couldn't be done about that situation. But that's definitely the next questions, I guess, that pop up.
And we need to think about how we respond a little bit, and Cliff can tell me, but I assume that Wetland Day was not designated as a storage area before this happened.
Yeah, it
Other
was.
than its own, other than it has a big catchment area and a lot of drains, but was it considered for storage of Grass Lake water before this happened?
No wetlands are actually defined for storage. Stormwater basins are defined for storage, but wetlands are there in the kind of condition that they exist, and knowing that they will fluctuate to a degree. But no, nobody would ever define wetland A to be a storage area for 100 acre feet of water or whatever would be stored there. No,
But it has no outlet. It has no outlet, and we've made a place for Grass Lake to overflow into it again. So what is it?
Make it happened, yeah.
Pre-development, if you really go back, that's how the natural flow would have gone, right? So, or would have been all connected.
Before Ramsey Road was there.
Before Ramsey or before development. That whole area was all wetlands. So certainly that's part of its natural drainage system. And then we put unnatural things in its way.
Well, I assume the natural drainage system is pretty much north to south with the 125-foot drop to the Mississippi. So, and that's what we really improved when we invested in the improvements of it. And that's the way the water flows.
Yeah. Unless you went back and looked at every single public works improvement and every modification to the topography, it's hard to define which improvement or what series of improvements lock that into that situation happening. And I think a lot of it is the obstruction of Grass Lake's natural outlet, and which goes back 100 years probably. So it's difficult to lay blame as to what happened. Just, but basically we can lay blame to five of the wettest years in history is led up to what happened.
Well, that certainly was a big part of it, and I'm not about laying blame, but I am questioning whether Wetland A should be a storage place for Grass Lake water. And it's
Well, and
great
that was-
that right now it's been moving ever since those improvements were made with the West Vadnais outlet.
Well, right, so there was a combo, that water isn't leaving grass or Wetland A because of the outlet lowering, right? Because it doesn't have an
Not
outlet.
directly, but that's
Yeah.
when everything, all of the water in the whole area started going down really fast.
But that's only because
And-
of the change in the rainfall patterns over the last couple
I
of
don't
years.
think-
Not
Grass
because-
Lake going down, there's something going on that you can't see because where else is Wetland A water going? It's.
Well, it's going into the
down.
ground and
Yeah.
evaporating. Yeah.
But
I think-
Brad has told us before they're all connected, and they are to a certain extent. If you compare what's going on with all of the water bodies and all of the various wetlands. So that's all.
I think too that, you as the board made a decision at one point in time when we talked about making changes in that area to solidify that overflow if need, because we needed it for flood protection in other places. Now we could reevaluate that, but what that meant was concerns about Ramsey Road or Rice Street, those are all the factors that go into play. So again, we just have to, each case scenario, we need to evaluate where we're accepting the risk and where we're not.
Because in fact, we are using Wetland A for storage, because if we approved 2 projects that had to do with that. One was Grass Lake, where the overflow, and we're just in the process of trying to replant that and redo the walkway in that area, I guess. So if Grass Lake gets too high and it can't get out, it comes into Wetland A. If Snail Lake gets too high and it can't get out, it doesn't go into Crestview anymore, thank heavens. It goes into Wetland A. So Wetland A is designated to take all this stuff. The question is, and this probably will happen to other places too, it's not just about Wetland A, but it's if you're going to have a plan to get the water into it, what's your plan to get the water out? And that's what I don't see in this case. And we should. That should be part of the process that we have as we're developing the Beltline study. Again, I remember the Beltline study said, for example, okay, down in this area, I can't remember if it's Coleman or Ames Lake, probably Ames Lake. If it goes up, we're going to flood the baseball fields. Well, okay, that's fine. That'll irritate everybody. But what's the plan for getting it out of there? Do we know the hydrology to be able to reset it? And I think that's a critical part of what we're going to be doing going forward, is to make sure that when we have these contingency plans, that we also have a plan to get out of it.
Okay. I think those are good discussions that will, like you said, talk about those policies that are in our plan.
Okay, let's, unless anyone has anything else they want to say right now, let's move on from this. We're going to have this ongoing discussion about this and redevelopment of the plan.
I do have one thing, Larry.
Sure.
It's actually just, Karen, as you're going through and working with the new regulations, I would be really interested in understanding, as you guys do an assessment for types of changes, maybe if at all possible, if allowed, to bring some of those proposed changes to the board just to see if it addresses some of these points. I think that would be interesting. Like when we do a change, there's a gap assessment, right? Or that's what we call it. Not saying that there's a gap, but we generally say this is the list of enhancements. And I was curious if we ever got to see that, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I plan to get involved in the technical committees for this process of coming up with a new assessment method. And I work with a lot of watershed organizations that are dealing, like I said, are dealing with a lot of these similar situations. So I plan to bring all of you in as stakeholders during this process. So I'll figure out the best way to do that and involved, definitely.
Thank you.
And by the way, I'm a little remiss. Thank you for coming to the meeting, Karen. I appreciate it. It's nice
Sure, thank you.
if it's on a little square out there, but I appreciate you taking the time to come and have this discussion with us.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Karen.
Thanks, Karen.
Okay, if there's nothing else, thanks, Val. We'll move on to B, which is flood risk project scope summary updates.
We've
Brad,
got
are you gonna-
two scope summaries that we've included in the packet for consideration. These are things we've talked about the past few months, and this is the process we go through to say, okay, here's how we're breaking it down. Here's how we're going to propose to move forward in these efforts, whether they be studies, projects, or whatnot, the next step in the process. And if you look at the figure where it kind of shows orange boxes, green boxes, and blue boxes, we've got the orange and the green series of boxes in these two scope summaries. I guess that's the easiest way I can simplify it. And we're just saying, okay, this is when we're going to start. We're at the check-in point to see if you have any specific questions again, but this is nothing really that new. We've talked about it over the past several months when Aaron has been at the board meeting. I think the one, what I would call moderate change, is the request last month to look at more impact of, say, the 2-year storm and the 10-year storm and the 100-year storm. So the emergency response plans and the maps that go with it, and how we communicate that return frequency, basically our statistical approach to looking at these, how we communicate that to the cities and to all of you is included now. And that was a discussion point we had, I think, last month. So that is the scope summaries that is tied to the emergency response plans. Are there any questions on either one? Oh, I'm sorry, Larry, go ahead.
Yeah, the little map that you're talking about on page 6, I like that. We talked about that in the last one, being able to delineate when we're doing projects, what structures are impacted by the 2-year, 5-year, 50-year flood. I think that's worthwhile. I had a little trouble reading the legend down at the bottom. I tried to expand it on my screen, but it's a very good image to start with. But I think the idea behind that is a good one, because as we move through, we may not have these mega projects we can get done, but if we can do some things to, like, if we have 17 houses that are at risk, and we can do something that we can afford in the short term and do it, and take 10 of them out of the risk thing, that's a worthwhile thing doing, rather than waiting for all kinds of money and a big engineering project to get all 17 of them out. And this kind of visualization would help me a lot in understanding that. So I like it. I like exactly what, even though I can't tell what the things are, but I'm accepting of the fact that that's what you've done. And
yes.
You know, I go back to thinking about something like dredging Jarvis Creek to get water away from the Owasso Basin faster and help mitigate maybe flood duration or even the flood itself. That was something that I thought was a pretty good idea. I think it it was something reasonable that we can do. It should help with things. It's not the big deal with all the pipes and everything else that we were talking about, but it's those kind of little steps that would show up on a picture like this, where we could visualize to the city the investments we're making and how we're making things better for them. Like, maybe not when the 100-year flood shows up, but certainly when the 2-year flood shows up.
Right.
Right.
And
Yeah,
I agree with Larry's comments. I like the edits a lot. I was curious, is there a need for a board motion to approve the additional spend? Because I mean, like, I'm all for that. I was curious. There was an increase, I think, of 30K or something like that for the additional work.
Right.
60, yeah.
I mean, we have that. I don't need that from the board. We have that in our contingency funds to be able to, yeah, do that work.
Then do it, man.
I'd say go ahead and do it.
We'll get on it. Yep. And the other scope summary that is really linked with the grant application and the efforts around, I'll call it stakeholder engagement and conceptual planning for the diversion from the North St. Paul Urban Ecology Center, the diversion of high flows, possibly through Goodrich Golf Course on its way to Wakefield Lake to help alleviate some of the flooding. That is the other effort. We should hear on February, right, Tina?
I think it's early March.
Early March. Okay.
Yeah.
But regardless, it doesn't come with a huge price tag. So even if we are unsuccessful in that, is this the time to at least consider whether we move forward with this regardless, or we want to wait until March?
Yeah, that's what I was, that was exactly going to be my question. What if they turn us down? Are we just not going to do anything for that amount of money? I think this is a good project and we ought to go ahead and do it anyway.
Yeah, I didn't look at our feasibility study list. Brad, did we budget for this one anyway? Besides the grant?
I think it's wrapped into a bigger, this is just a piece broken out of it, but I think it is
out of the Coleman
budgeted
Creek.
for. Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So I think we do have the funds available. If we got the grant, I think it expanded maybe some of the community engagement pieces through the grant, but yeah, I certainly would propose that we continue to move forward with it.
Yeah. Any other discussion on that?
I agree.
Okay. Should we have a motion to approve moving ahead with that?
You can, yeah.
I mean, do we need it? Do we need it, or just?
You don't have, no, I don't believe you have to, but if you'd like to.
We don't need it as long as it's, just make sure it's reflected accurately as not, yeah.
Yeah, feasibility studies, we have a little more leeway in that. It's different than doing a, in the ground project.
Yeah, so the minutes reflect that there was a consensus that we should proceed.
Yeah, that's what I was going to suggest, Cliff. So I would motion to proceed if that helps get us all on the board and makes it a point of record.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Okay, I've got a motion and a second. Any comment? Call the roll. We got a motion. That's good.
All right. Cliff.
Aye.
Diane.
Aye.
Val.
Aye.
And Larry.
Aye. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Feel much better. Okay, now we're on to item 10C, the website update and prototype presentation.
Yes, and Lauren is here tonight.
Hello. I don't know if I'm the first, but happy World Wetlands Day.
You are the
Seems like
first.
The discussion has been pretty on theme, so that's great. So we've been making a lot of progress in terms of the website, and so I wanted to touch base with you all and share some of that progress and those updates. Let's see if I can share the screen here. Okay. So I promise this is not a long PowerPoint. So these are some of the items that were in that executive recommendation document that Jonathan presented a few months ago. So I just wanted to revisit this just to reassure you all, these are all items that are still going to be on the website. They are ones that we heard from the user interviews, and that's something that is made its way to development and to the design stages. So those are the two things that are happening concurrently right now. So we are working on a lot of new content for the website, and one of those things is going to be a glossary of terms. We're also looking into the possibility of having a hover function on different pages of the website that can define terms that are not typically found in everyday speech. Our search and filter functions are improving, both in the document library and in the site itself. We're really beefing up the search functionality. We've invested in a higher quality search function for the website. We're going to do contact point hints. So that's basically going to be a card on every single project page that has the primary contact for that project with a nice little photo of them and their email and their phone number, and you can click through to a staff, full staff page on them. So that should help in terms of the contacts, improved mapping systems, and search functionality there. Volunteer engagement sections are going to be in there. More educational resources. We're really building out our education section, a financial page, and then data. There's going to be a data section so that if you want to look at the individual data for water levels or for the data that we report out to MPCA in terms of water quality, we'll have a link directly to that page. So what I'm going to share with you right now is not going to look like this. And that's one thing to know about a prototype is it doesn't have any design elements in it. It doesn't have any formatting. It's merely built so that we can see kind of the navigation and the functionality of the website to see if that is working. Then we're all going to go in and put in the content and start with the design. We are starting the design phase at the same time. And so this is kind of an example of one of the possible design directions that we're going into. All three of them have something that we call a homepage hero, which you can kind of see here, which means that instead of a photo band like we currently have at the top of the website, we have different options for people to click in this section, and this will rotate out during the year. I definitely encourage you not to write these dates down. None of them are accurate, but it's just an example in terms of what you can see. But you can see examples of different things that we're going to have. And one of the education pieces is kind of a watershed 101 section for people who have had no previous encounters with watersheds or watershed management. They need that kind of foundational knowledge before they can really understand the rest of what's on our website and what we're about as an organization. So with that caveat, I will show you the prototype. So as I mentioned, it's not going to win any beauty contests. That's not the main point of the prototype. It's just to show us the functionality. And so none of our colors are in here. None of our fonts are in here. There's no font formatting decisions that have been made. All of the photos are basic stock type photos that we put in the website. So what we're really looking at here is the navigation and kind of how everything is built out on the menu. So I'm just going to move from left to right fairly quickly, but if you have any questions, feel free to stop me and I'll try to leave some time at the end for those as well. So you'll see our about section, and that's built out a little bit more than our current website. So one of the things that we're really emphasizing this is our overall strategy as an organization, so that people can understand that we have an overall management plan and how that works and how that ties into decisions that are made in terms of the projects we do. So people get that overall picture. We also have the team page. That's fairly consistent. I'll show you an example of what that looks like. So obviously that is not our staff. Those are stock photos, but it gives you an idea of what this will look like. If we click through to an individual page, it'll give more background information about that individual staff member, and also give hints in terms of what that staff member does in terms of, you know, if I have a question, why should I contact Tina, or why should I contact Paige? What are the main things that somebody might contact them for, to give them some hints there. Board of Managers page, again, stock photos. You can kind of see the formatting here in terms of just very basic. Other things that we have on the About page are the watershed history. The title is going to change there, our financials page, so it's easy to find financial information. And then if we go over to the waters, one thing we wanted to do is make it very clear. We have a lot of maps and a lot of different options in terms of how you can navigate through our district. And so what they're going to have at the top here are individual cards so people can understand, you know, this menu is for identifying whether or not I'm in this watershed. Recreation, so, you know, if I want to paddle through the Phelan Lake chain, if I want to bike, you know, here are the resources for that. The ArcGIS map, which is a little bit hidden on our current website, is going to be a little bit more visible here. That might be helpful for people who are considering stewardship grants. They want to see similar projects that have been done in their area. And then the waters map is going to be somewhat similar to our current map. We're just dividing out projects in waters. So we have one section for waters and one section for projects, so people can find that different information there. So again, this is not design formatting in terms of this map. It's just a very basic example. But you can see, you can click, there's an individual card. And then we'll have different information here, and then the water quality, those graphs, that longitudinal data on water quality indicators, those will be presented as images as they currently are on our website. We will include video functionality on one of these pages, and then we'll have cards that have related projects on there as well.
I'm happy to hear that you're going to put video on it, because I think on your Facebook page you have that World Wetlands Day with Bill talking video. It'd be nice to be able to like duplicate some of that same content between the two, because there's multiple mediums that users typically go to. So I'm excited to hear that.
Yep, and we've, I'd say in the last 5 years, really doubled down in terms of how much video we're outputting as an organization. So, and I think that trend will continue. We get a lot of engagement with video. So being able to put that on our waters pages, this is also something that we can do on our projects pages, which I'll show you in a bit. And then I mentioned earlier the data pages. So this is what this will look like. These will be individual cards, potentially with a photo in the background, and people can click out to these external pages to see all of that data. The lake level Power BI, that will be a page that shows all of the lakes together, and you can click through and see all of the lake level data for the individual lakes. Okay. So moving on to projects. One thing that we wanted to add to this iteration of our projects map is the ability to narrow down by location. So if I go to Maplewood it repopulates, and then it will only show me the water bodies in Maplewood, and then I can select down. And we also have the option of doing in process, completed, under maintenance, those sorts of things. So if people are looking for only projects that are currently active or only projects that are currently under maintenance, they'll be able to do that. And we also have this little search functionality. Okay. And we also have the default card option for people who like that. And this is what an individual project page will look like. Again, no formatting or design here. This is just basic functionality. But you can see a lot of the similar information that's very popular. You can see a lot of the search terms are up here in terms of completion, water body, location. There's lots of different modules that we can put in here, video, map functionality. We have a video photo slideshow that we can do. You can see a couple of those examples down here. And then related projects in a card format. So this is clearly not Bill, but this is an example of what that that contact point would look like on these individual project pages. So, you know, I'm looking at this project, it's in my area, I'm curious about it, I'm reading updates. I go down here, I can view related blog posts and news items related to that individual project. I know who to contact. So hopefully people can go to this individual project page and find everything that they want. One thing that we're trying to emphasize here is we do have a search functionality. It's going to be improved, but we want to make sure that this is user-friendly to anybody at any level of knowledge about the watershed. So they can just look on the website. They don't have to search, hopefully. Okay. This is our Learn section. So basic cards. And then in terms of what you can do on this page, we're going to have these sections that we can basically put on the top related to the season. So featured resources for fall, for spring, for winter, and then we can pull those up to the top when that season rolls around, additional resources, and cross links to other sections of the website. But this is basically a repository for people who want to do best practices, like, you know, reducing the amount of salt they're using, or looking at installing a rain barrel, those sorts of things. So we're really encouraging people to learn and get engaged. The glossary is here. And then in terms of get involved, it's a very similar format. We have volunteer opportunities, so there'll be an individual embedded form for volunteer opportunities. Stewardship grants. So we're going to be dividing this out according to the audience so that there's specific pages for residents, for businesses and nonprofits and churches, and then for larger municipal projects. Right now it's all on one page, so this will basically divide down by audience. They can find all the information that's just applicable to them in their project. And then, of course, the information for ongoing maintenance. Our awards section is very basic. Then I'll show you permitting. So this is a little bit more visible than our current website, where permitting and stewardship grants are on that side resource menu. This is also dividing it out into resident and contractor, now that we're getting more questions about permitting from residents. We have that point of contact option. And then this is just an example of a full screen module, but we'll have this link back to stewardship grants, especially for residents who are looking at that type of funding. The events. So this is where we're going to move the board meeting. It'll also be up on our home page here so that people can click through and see the board information at the top. But we'll also have the board meetings under the events page, so that it's right at the top of an individual page and our events section. Okay, and then we kind of have a top level basic resource menu. And this is where the document library lives. So one of the main changes here is we're going to add excerpts to each individual document. And what that will do is it will allow us to search individual subjects that might be in that document. So for example, if you're looking at something related to the Beltline Resiliency study, or if you want to look at documents related to Ryan Drive Culvert Project, we will have, keywords in the excerpt. So even if it's just titled board packet, if you search Ryan Drive Culvert, all of the ones that had Ryan Drive Culvert information in the board packet would come up, and same thing with other reports. So this also narrows down. So if I was going to go to 2021, it's only going to show me documents from 2021, and the categories will also narrow down. So if there's only educational materials or there's only reports, it won't show, educational materials or reports or any other like presentations if there were no presentations for that particular year. And then there's this basic search. The contact page will have links back to the staff directory and board of managers. And it will also have an embedded form for people who are looking to report an issue, and that will automatically go where it needs to go. This will link to a Google Drive, a Google Map, so people can see that. And then the last thing is we have this optional announcement banner at the top. So this is basically for high priority time-bound items. So, if we had something that popped up in the news as a particular concern, we want to direct people to that. Or if there's something like COVID-19 information, something where we want to direct people to that immediately. That would be what we would use the optional announcement banner for. And this is our footer. We just have a newsletter sign up down here and our contact information. Okay, I know this has been a longer meeting and I just threw a lot of information at you, but if you have any questions, any comments, I'm more than happy to answer anything.
Lauren, you went through everything really fast, which
Yes.
I appreciate. I appreciate that. But tell me if I missed it, was the Citizen Advisory Committee included in Get Involved?
I'll show you where that is. Let me see here. So currently they're under about. And then potentially seasonally, we'd put them under volunteer opportunities as well. So one thing we're planning on doing, we're kind of in volunteer management discussions right now, but we'd have kind of volunteer opportunity titles and then the description and requirements that would be available here. So for example, if we were recruiting for water stewards or CAC or a different role, we could also have that in that section.
Yeah, I think it should be included there.
Okay.
And also the list, you know, have it both places, the list of members and vacancies.
Mhm.
And Cliff may be a better one to weigh on that than me, but I know they had some vacancies and it is a way that we involve more people in our work.
Yeah, definitely.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it should be both places as well.
Okay.
But I like it so far, Lauren. It's good.
Yeah, I agree. I think it looks very good. Better, better than I'd hoped for.
Well, that's good to hear. Yeah, and if you do have thoughts, you know, later, please let me know. So the rough schedule right now is we will probably have the design, a rough design finished by the middle of March. So it won't be ready in time for the next board meeting, but the board meeting after that. And then we'll also be going through the development process, not the final development stages, but basically looking at adjustments for the prototype and starting to populate some of the content for the website. So migrating some of the content over and then creating some of the new content for the website. One thing that we're looking at doing is getting some infographics for Watershed 101 so we can show it, you know, in visual medium how different concepts interact within a watershed, because it's kind of hard to navigate if you don't have that visual reference. And I mentioned that we're going to be updating a lot of our educational resources for the website. We've also done a lot of videotaping just in the last couple of years. And we hope to do some more of that so that we'll have also some video resources in the resource library for people to check out. So pretty exciting.
And Lauren, if you're looking for like some ideas or looking for people to test it out, you know, feel free to reach out, because I could think through a series of what you might perceive as test cases. Like, I have this question I want to go through and see. You know, very happy to volunteer some additional time to walk through that.
Yes, absolutely. So we will be doing usability testing as soon as I get the go ahead from our team at St. Paul Media. We'll be reaching back out to all of you in terms of ideas for people. We are looking at people who are separate from the initial user interviews, so we can just expand the group in terms of that feedback. So when that does roll around, I'll make sure to reach out, you know, either at a board meeting or via email to just let you know that we've entered that stage.
Are you going to migrate all of the information that's on the current website over to this one plus additional stuff?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So I will say, when I say us, I don't mean staff. St. Paul Media will be doing that. It's hours and hours worth of work, and you know, I don't want to stress our staff's capacity like that. You know, they're experts in their field. I don't want them migrating data. So they will be doing that. We have kind of a fairly small team that's been working on the website. Simple Blood's been at pretty much every meeting in terms of this, and she does a lot of website support in addition to her other many talents. And then Emily Simmons will be working on this as well.
Good.
Well, thank you all. Happy
Any
to
other
give you an
comments?
update again. If you have any other comments, I'd love to hear them.
That looks terrific. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Lauren.
I think it looks good too, and I understand I won't have to brush up on my Latin.
No, the Latin will leave the website.
Kind of rusty.
Yeah, from back when I was working on websites like that, I recognize a lot of those phrases.
Great. Thanks, Lauren.
Good. Thanks. Okay, oh, sorry, it's over to me. Administrators report.
Yeah, so thankfully, as I look at the time, my report is short this month, but I did include, as requested, the Victoria Shores response to comments for the EAW for your information. And I, as an update, like up to the minute update, I did hear from City of Roseville today that the City Council did approve a different plat, so a revised plat for Victoria Shores. And some of the things that they took into account when they approved that plat was none of the lakeshore lots will have riparian rights. So they that's all in an outlot, and they narrowed, or they're limiting the access points. So they went from 6 to 4. So there's still 4 access points, but they're spread out pretty equally across the way. You know, platting is just kind of planning out what the lots will look like. I don't know, Nicole, if we've had an update on stormwater management or permits since they've been through
No,
that process.
you have the most up to date. I didn't even know that. So no, we sent comments regarding their stormwater plan in December, and it sounds like they haven't responded because they were dealing with this plat issue and other city issues first. So
yeah, I think they wanted to get their plat approved before they moved into design and stormwater changes, so, and wetland and all the different factors. But I think it was a good process, and I think the development will be better because of that too. So
Great. That's big news.
Ina, can I ask a question about that and make a clarification? The comment said that our enforcement was the requirement, and actually the requirement kind of sets the law or what has to be followed. The enforcement is how you enforce that requirement. So that's my question. Is there going to be regular inspections? Just having it in there doesn't mean that it's going to happen. It sets the requirements. So how are we going to know that they aren't infringing on the wetland and the way it's described?
right, so we do have so the agreements that we would have in place would allow us access to the site for inspections, and so that is something we're already out inspecting for stormwater management. So we would include that buffer, you know, eyes on the buffer and wetlands as part of that. I think this change in plats for that area to be an outlot and not, you know, individual property owners, I think is going to be really helpful in that as well. But
I
it is
agree.
something that
It's
we will
just
have our
that
eyes on.
once the homeowners get in there and maybe even sell to another homeowner, it's not something that's gonna be a problem right away. So I'm suggesting that there's at least a yearly inspection for a long time.
Yeah.
Because otherwise there's no enforcement of that.
Right, that's correct. So that is something that we would do, well, but between us and the city. So we would share that responsibility.
Thank you.
I expect we'll hear from neighbors too, right away, if something were happening.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. There'll be a lot of people watching.
Yeah, lots of eyes on the ground for sure.
Mhm. Okay, all right, good. Anything else for Tina? Okay, anything on the project reviews? Diane? You're muted.
Mhm.
You're muted.
Getting late. I saw in the ripple effect that the notice about our budget, but was a news release ever really done to the newspapers and all of the other media outlets about our budget?
Or to the media outlets?
Yeah,
No, we didn't. Well, Lauren, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you sent any specific press releases. We put it, like you said, in the ripple effect and have shared that on our website as well, but
Why didn't we send it to media outlets? Because the ripple effect is like 1,500 people and a lot of them don't even bother to look at it. So the idea there, when I look at like the Shoreview Press, there's been article about the increase in property taxes that'll go on. The idea there was to give publications like that and the Pioneer Press and the Star Tribune some good news when it comes for property taxes. So why didn't we send it to them?
I think I'll take the brunt of that one. I don't think I relayed your comments correctly to Lauren. I didn't understand that you were interested in media. I was thinking you wanted to share with our residents through our channels, but Lauren, I don't know if you can speak to sending that out as a media release.
Well, it would
Sure,
still
I can
be-
put together a press release and send it out.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea because in the very near future, we're going to get our property tax bills and everybody's going to be really. So if there's something that they can put in the paper that will make them less mad at us, that would be a good thing.
and we specifically said a news release, and I think this was the December, because for news releases, you have to time them around an event. So we could time it when we set the budget or when Ramsey County adopts it. It's kind of lame to just throw it out at an odd time, but I bet like Shoreview or these other ones would pick it up. But it was a really good thing. And the ripple effect article was good, but we wanted a news release to publicize this piece of good news for the residents.
I apologize for that I missed the mark on that, but I'll talk to Lauren about that.
Okay.
If you can find another window that kind of makes sense or draft in such a way that they'll grab it anyway.
Just do it. I mean, sending it out doesn't mean they'll publish it, but it's
Oh. It doesn't mean.
What their success would be, Lauren, you know?
I mean, if we're talking about timing, tax season is coming up.
Yeah.
So that would be thematically when people are looking at their taxes.
And Ramsey County, I don't think has sent out their newest form, so you can see.
They won't.
I think that's a good hook.
Next month, I think.
Mhm.
Well, and I'll give you an example. When our area was added to the watershed, we had in Shoreview, we had some pretty hefty tax increases.
Yeah.
And people were screaming and yelling. Cliff, you probably remember this.
Yep.
And one of the excuses was, oh, we've added the Grass Lake area to the watershed and they tax, and that's why your tax bills are going up. They said that 100%. So we could be news when people's tax bills are going up, because they'll be screaming and yelling, they'll be writing articles on it. That they'll have information that one of the contributors has been responsible in what they did. It's going to be the city of St. Paul or Ramsey County or Hennepin County or city of Minneapolis, where they're all going to get their taxes raised.
Yeah. Well, worth a shot.
Yeah, it's worth a shot. So let's try it.
Okay. So just to clarify, would you like the press release as soon as possible, or would you like me to wait till closer to tax day?
Well, I think just do it because it's going to take them a while to respond to it. So
Yeah, they'll have it, and when tax day comes up and they're writing this stuff up, it may not be an individual story, but it may be a part of it.
Yeah.
And tax day is coming up pretty soon, I would guess. Because these are the property tax stuff that we get, and that usually comes out in the next.
March,
yeah. So
Yeah, so I'd say get it out.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. The only other one thing that I would say at this point is congratulations, Bill and Simba, on killing as many carp as possible.
yeah.
Who does the netting when you change from box netting to net netting?
We do the hand netting, so the natural resources team goes out and does that netting. And it looks like it slowly is becoming more efficient than the box netting. So our catch per unit effort is decreasing with the box netting. And we're becoming more efficient with the hand netting at the barriers.
Yeah.
So we might be phasing out the box netting over the next couple of years.
Okay. All right.
So another piece of information, kind of a take home is that we're not seeing any young of the year carp in the main lakes, which means that we're stopping recruitment or reproduction in these systems.
Yeah.
So we're cutting off those key spawning areas, which is really critical for the long-term management of the system. So that's real positive news.
Great. Great. I like that report.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments on the projects and things like that? Any comments from the managers? Cliff?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I don't know if any of you do know, but I did not seek reappointment to my position on the board. My position expires the end of this month, actually the 23rd or something, but Ramsey County has posted the position. They would have anyway, even if I sought reappointment, but well, Ramsey County will be appointing somebody new to fill my position. I don't know if I will give you a reason. I don't have to, but you know, my wife died last year and I'm just redoing my life. And one of the things I'm doing is I'm building out I'm converting a van into a camper to go by myself. My son is helping me, and I plan to almost full-time travel for at least the next year and see if I can sustain it. Impose on friends for a while, and I need a permanent place to stay for a little bit, and see the country, go on trips that my wife and I plan to do, and see other sites and do more golfing and fishing. So I won't be around much. In fact, I'm going to be selling my house to my daughter, so I'll use this as an address, but I won't be here. So anyway, I firmly believe that I'm part of a board. I attend every meeting, and I won't be here, so that's why I am not seeking reappointment. But it's been a privilege to serve with all of you. I don't know if they will reappoint somebody by the end of the month. If not, I will be at the March meeting. And looking forward to new things.
Wow. Congratulations
Yeah, thanks.
on your new life, and we're definitely gonna miss you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's tough. Thanks for letting us know. And we wish you well.
No, thank you.
Sure, that's a big change, but it sounds like a wonderful opportunity, and you've contributed so much. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I won't be a stranger. I'll pop around once in a while.
Okay, yeah,
I know when you think about the time that you've committed to this watershed over the 40 plus years, yeah, it's really significant. So definitely going to be missed around here. And I asked Cliff when he told me if he would be willing to come back so we could do a recognition of some sort
thank you.
at a later date. So we can talk about more about that too and how we want to do that.
Yeah, thank you. I was gonna ask about that. Great. And you leave a legacy, Cliff, which is a good thing, in many ways. The building, the plans and all of that sort of stuff. So even if you're not here at the meetings, your presence will still be felt.
Mhm.
So Cliff, where are you gonna head out first? Have you figured it out?
Yeah, I'm going to be testing the van first, probably in April, but then after that, I'm going out east to visit my daughter in Martha's Vineyard, and then go to some places like Gettysburg, and my nephew's up in Maine. I've wanted to get back to Quebec, so I'm probably, if Canada opened up the borders, I'll get up there. Yeah, got a friend in the Adirondacks, so I plan to mosey around there in the spring, and then in the fall, I'm going to go southwest. So we'll be busy.
And David's helping you with the van?
Yeah, he's the brains. I'm the labor. Been up there almost every day since
That's fun.
mid-December. Yeah,
Very
it's a lot of
cool.
work. It's a lot of work,
Yeah.
but we're doing it right. And
Want to
that's-
see pictures of it when you're done too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
send us
Please share.
postcard.
I'll swing by the office.
Yeah.
You need
Yeah, we
a
want to-
YouTube channel.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking about that.
Yeah, definitely.
Keep track of the old fart on the road. Yeah.
Yeah. It'd be like,
That'd be a
where's
nice
Waldo?
bumper
Where's
sticker.
Cliff?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
I'd watch we watch a lot of those RV and van lifers. So
Yeah,
That's true.
van life has been a real asset. There's a lot of good YouTube videos on building out stuff. So they've been
Yeah.
a big help.
Yeah.
Mm.
Wow. Okay. Well, I don't think anybody else is gonna top that, but
Sorry.
I was just
Yeah.
gonna say happy Lunar New Year, but honestly, not
Thank
confident.
you.
You're gonna have so much fun.
Yeah.
you,
Go through. Yep.
does anybody else have anything that they want to talk about? Okay, that took the air right out of me. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So
Motion
moved.
to second.
Okay, we're done with the meeting. Thank you
Adjourn.
so much. I appreciate it.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
I know.
Right.
Good to see you.